The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
This is Gerard with episode number 41 of Florida's Fresh Mix on the Florida Podcast Network, a random mix of Florida's freshest personalities. Listen in.
Hey everyone, welcome to Florida's Fresh Mix podcast. My name is Amortegui and I am the lead content producer of the Florida Podcast Network. And with me, as always, is your host, Gerard. What's up, Gerard?
What's up is my spirits. Pun intended.
Nice. We love a good pun in the intro.
Exactly. My spirit and my spirits are definitely up after speaking to Dr. Sandra. I mean, what an amazing conversation. Very deep and also very interesting. And there's a lot of introspection and a lot of great advice. So I don't want to give away too much, but I loved every second of it.
No, absolutely. This was quite a fascinating conversation. And for our listeners, real quick, Gerard spoke with Dr. Sandra Marie. She is the host of the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. And she's also the founder of Wild Soul Gatherings. She's based out of St. Petersburg. She was a nurse for over 40 years until she made that transition. Listeners, you all know and love with a lot of our guests, that transition into pursuing her passions, which includes helping people throughout their spiritual journeys. So this interview tackles a lot of things, including, of course, her origin story. And again, not to give anything away, but she has a farm for spiritual retreats. Pretty cool stuff.
Very, very cool. And the story behind how the farm came about and how she ended up doing what she's doing and sharing her story and trying to provide service in this way. It's all great and very motivating. So Listen, I don't want to give away too much. Like you just said, just let people dive in. And if you listen to this interview and you don't feel like you need to kind of think about the way you think about the world that we're in and your place in it, then we failed. Because I think this interview does so much to kind of force you to pick your own brain.
I want to hone in real quick on a word that you used, which was service. That is a huge theme in your conversation with Dr. Sandra Marie. Mm-hmm. She talks about how she just has a servant's heart. So speaking of service, Gerard, why don't you tell the people about Guitars Over Guns organization and the services that they provide?
I'm happy to, Amber. Thank you so much for that great segue. As our devoted Fresh Mixers already know, for the past 3 years, I've proudly served on the board of directors of Guitars Over Guns. GoGo is an incredibly impactful nonprofit organization that offers students from disadvantaged communities in Miami, Chicago, and Los Angeles, for now, we will expand, a powerful combination of music education and strong mentoring relationships with professional musicians to help them overcome hardship, find their voice, and reach their potential as tomorrow's leaders. Please head to the show notes for more information about GoGo. And most importantly, to donate. It's for the kids.
It's all for the kids, Gerard. All for the kids.
That's right.
Seriously, people, check out the show notes. Donate what you can. One more quick reminder, listeners. If you've been listening to our show since day one or since today, please go ahead and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to this podcast. Help us get this show to as many Floridians' ears as possible. We would really, really appreciate that.
Floridians and the world, girl, and the world.
And the world. There's Floridians here and abroad. All right, people. Let's go ahead and get into Gerard's spiritual conversation with Dr. Sandra Marie.
All right, Fresh Mixers. Listen, I am so happy that we have, the universe brought us together. My next guest, Dr. Sandra Marie. I am so happy to have you here. Podfest actually made this happen. so many things emanate from Podfest. It's such a magical experience, and it brings people into your lives that otherwise you would have never run into. So how are you today, Sandra?
I am doing great, Gerard. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be part of the show, and 100% Podfest is an amazing experience of amazing souls. Just to interject real quick, I was expecting it to be very competitive because you have thousands of people who are doing the same thing and basically competing. And that so was not the vibe there. It was, how can I help you? And what can I do? And what are you doing? It was a beautiful thing.
That is so true. And it was so collegial. I didn't see a single, nobody was hating on each other. Everybody was helping each other. It was beautiful. So that was my first time there. Was that your first time as well?
It was. And honestly, I was like, this is my vision of the world. This is something I was meant to be. Yep. I was definitely a newbie.
Right. Well, I'm definitely going to go next year and every year I can, now that I'm officially a podcaster. And so are you. So,
I am. And how cool is this? Like, who would have ever thought we would be on this journey, right?
Yeah, I know. I think, the cool thing was that I think Podfest landed on literally my 1-year anniversary of, starting my podcast. And so my sister turned to me, who's a producer of this show, and said to me, "You're officially a podcaster, like at Podfest." Like it just happened to coincide like that. And it made me all excited. So
yeah.
Anyway, well, I have so many questions for you. Now, I'm going to do something a little different that I think I've only done once before. Usually this is the point where I say, okay, we've got Dr. Sandra Marie, and she does this and she does that, and this is who she is. But given the nature of what we're going to be discussing and your background and your story, I think it's more appropriate to have you define yourself. Tell me, who are you and what part of your journey are you in at this moment? Define yourself. You go.
Oh, I love it. I feel special that we're doing something new and different. So that's a great question. Define myself.
Just for you.
Thanks. I love being put on the spot like that. So I am a person who has really been on a journey of service. I started my career back many decades ago as a nurse, once a nurse, always a nurse, and just recently left my job to do what I'm going to be doing now, and we can get a little more into that. So I would define myself as a person of service. That's a whole story in itself with that journey. I've been in the Middle East, and I've worked on some refugee camps up in Bangladesh, and I've done that kind of stuff, as well as the, day job as working as a nurse. I was an ER nurse, and then I got into the corporate side of it. And what I see myself doing now is just moving to a totally different path of service and how I'm going to service the world and service people as I move forward. I feel like I've grown more emotionally and spiritually, that I wanted to sort of move in a different direction. And healthcare has just become a pretty huge corporate animal, as well as all of the many people who go in every day and give of themselves to take care of people. And I just felt like it was time to go a different direction. So how I would define myself honestly is that I was put on the earth to serve people and to serve the earth. And I'm just going to step off that other path and step onto a new path. When you ask me where I'm at in the journey, I was like, wow, that's a fascinating question. I could start with, I'm at the beginning of the journey, but what I'm going to tell you with is I honestly feel like I am at the final parts of my journey. As I said, I've been doing this since my 20s. And honestly, I used to work as a lifeguard in my teens. So again, it's a job of service and giving and caring and teaching. There's sort of that common thread throughout my life with it. And I've done those things. I've grown. I've seen a lot. I've met a lot of people. I've experienced a lot. A lot of lives have touched mine, just as I know I've touched other people's lives. I know when I was mentoring young nurses, even honestly till just last month when I left my job, when you're mentoring people, I always tell people in healthcare that you are unaware of how many people's lives you touch and just how deeply you touch them because of the nature of what we do. So just don't take any interaction for granted. So when I started this Wild Souls Gathering, which is the overarching part of the podcast Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious, I have a team of people.
I love that name, by the way.
Thank you. I have a team of people, but I don't.
Sorry.
I have a lot of people in my life that I'm working with. And what I told them was, I feel like I am culminating what I was actually supposed to do, and everything has prepared me for this step, and the mission has just begun. So I feel like I am beginning the ending part of my mission on Earth to do this amazing, beautiful thing. And that's my story.
There's so many things I love about that answer, particularly because I was not expecting it to omit the word spirituality. I thought that it was going to, automatically go in that direction. Rather, you were focused on the word service, and you were put on this earth to serve and to bring joy and spread peace and bring harmony and healing to people. And, you've walked the walk. I mean, 40 years in healthcare, or over 40 years, that's a commitment to, people's health. But there's also, based on my understanding, there's also a downside to that, because it's so time intensive. It takes away from your ability to, devote your time to friends and family, etc. And perhaps not only it was that, but your service now is morphing into service of a different type. And then so that's where I was expecting the spirituality to come in. What inspired you to make that transformation from being in the healthcare field and saying, okay, that's a chapter I can redirect my service in another direction?
That's a good question. So I would say just the whole process of, as life is going on, you see all these things happening to people, and people going through horrific things, and you get into the grief counseling and all those kinds of things. So in most of the hospitals I've worked at, we always had spiritual care present. So if we had a major trauma or something coming in, one of the members of the team that responded to those were the spiritual care people. And I always linked very closely with them and worked with them and mentored with them, because it has always been innately part of my being that people's spirituality is just as important. So we're supporting more than just the physical, right? There's all the emotional and the people's mental, emotional, and their spirits. And we have to meet them where they're at. And with almost all people, it comes up when they're having some terrible thing that's happened in their life. It's an important kind of thing. And then you're working with physicians and nurses and coworkers and the techs and the unit clerks. And I mean, it's everyone, because you're one huge team. It doesn't happen without the team, for sure. It takes a piece of you. So it gets into your emotion. It gets into your soul. And how are we supporting each other? How does the organization support those workers? Well, in my experience, it really just doesn't happen. You're banging the work out. So it has always been a dream of mine to create an environment or a situation to be able to support people who give so much and are experience so much, or have had things happen to them, and meet their spiritual needs and sort of make them whole again. It's a part of it. So there's the virtual community with Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious, which is really important. And it's something that I'm working on and creating. I bought this farm in Southern Ohio that I am working on and trying to create a physical environment to bring people in so that they can honestly just decompress and be with themselves. And as things have really grown, and how we'll just say the intensity of the world and the electronic age and all of those kinds of things, it's really morphed into a bigger need than I would have ever thought of when I really came up with the idea of it, because I've just been compelled to do this. It's hard to put it into words. That's what I'm going to tell you is I have been compelled to do this for a long time. And I resisted doing it for a long time. And when I find I resist doing things, the universe or that greater power puts things in my path and keeps sort of kicking me in the you-know-what until I sort of reset and make a difference.
Why do you think you would resist something that your spirit is kind of telling you? And you just said you've been wanting to do this for a long time. Why do you think that you resisted for so long?
Oh, absolutely. The same reason that most of the people that exist do. I have a job. I have responsibilities. I have bills to pay. I have kids to take care of. I have grandkids in need. I have things to do. You have all these other things that you start to put out there that seem to be more important. Like, these things need to be done for me to survive. So you get caught up in that survival mode. And then you really just sort of lose yourself. And that's what I found with the whole thing, to be honest with you, is as I was, as I did a lot of traveling. So I had one job where I just was really being pulled to go to the Middle East. And it was that same mentality, like, you have this job, you have to work. I was working with a team. They were really a great team, but we were just buried in work. And I didn't want to step away. I had a great boss. She's actually down in Florida also. And she's like, if that's what you want to do, I'll support you. And I was like, no, I knew it was what I wanted to do, but I committed myself to the team. And then the next thing I knew, all 12 of us were giving a riff because they were eliminating all of our jobs and a cost cutting because they were pulling departments together. And the next thing you know, I got my job in the Middle East, and I was in the Middle East doing some work out there. But it gave me the opportunity. I was gifted the ability to go to Tibet and spend time in the monasteries and travel all these Eastern mystic religions. I just happened to be in the middle of a Hindu holiday on the beach when I did my Bangladesh thing. And it was funny. I have a good friend who I talk a lot about the spirituality and studying it and immersing myself. And every time I came back from a trip, I would go, I have to tell you, in the end, it really is just all the same. I would always just come back to the same conclusion of, we're all one. There's one spirit out there, and all these different modalities and religions, when you get into the basic teachings and take out the man part of it, it's all the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. And I'm really curious as to your origin story. First of all, this is the Fresh Mix podcast, which is Florida based. So you're living in St. Petersburg now. So there we go. But you are from Cleveland, Ohio, right? So when did that transition happen? And where in this timeline would you say that your spirituality came about?
Well, that is a good question. And I'll be very honest with you. About 15, 20 years ago, I woke up one morning with this message that I was to become a Reiki Master. Had never heard of Reiki, did not know what it was. It was not mainstream like it is now. When you Google it, nothing came up. It took me about 3 or 4 years.
Well, now I know that, sorry to interrupt, but I when I read that in your bio, first of all, I know you're not saying Reggae Master, so I don't want our listeners to get confused.
I will have to tell you, I do like reggae. Reiki, R-E-I-K-I, yes. It's an energy healing modality. So I was on a journey, and that was literally the beginning of it. I found classes, I met people, I went on to become a Reiki master and way beyond that. And I started really immersing myself in different energy work and listening to different people out there who do varieties of meditations and what they're doing, and just really growing myself spiritually. And it's been a process. And I would say, absolutely, I am not the same person 5 years ago that I was 10 years ago, that I was 15 years ago. Many people would tell you the same thing. But for me, I will tell you, it's just been a huge spiritual evolution with that. And once I started that, there was like no turning back. It was just more and more prominent with me that I was just compelled to learn more, expose myself more, spend more time doing the work with it. And that's truly sort of how I grew it. And honestly, the podcast, I'm not going to lie, that's how this podcast started. I woke up one morning because, it's a new business. It's something different. I'm quitting a job that I have done for decades, that I've been very successful with, that I've made good money at, to, really jump into something that is brand new that I have to learn. And how do you market and how do you pick a name and all those great things, right? So I wake up one morning and it's like, you need to do a podcast. And I'm like, a podcast? Like, no, I don't do podcasts. Like, I know nothing about this. And, now I have a podcast and I think I just dropped my 18th episode, but that's sort of how it works with me. So I guess it is what I'm supposed to do. And I have learned over the years, I'll be honest with you, Gerard, instead of fighting it, because when I fight it, uncomfortable things happen in my life because I get pointed back in the direction of the path I'm supposed to be on. If I'm not on the path, the things that I think I'm supposed to be doing just become extremely unenjoyable for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I love the phrase that you keep using about being pulled to do something. You got pulled to go to the Middle East. You got pulled to start the podcast and to do what you're doing now. It's a wonderful way to describe kind of what your gut is telling you to do, or your spirit or your soul. Let me ask you, when you say you get pulled to do something, in your mind, what's doing the pulling?
Creator, God, spirit, whatever you choose to call the greater power. Everyone there's so many different terms for it. To me, it's all the same.
Right. When did you move to Florida? And tell us about this farm, because what I find so interesting about your story and what you're doing right now is, you're not only trying to take on this project virtually, but physically, like literally. You have a farm and, you're going to have retreats there, but the farm is in Ohio. You're here in Florida. So how did the farm come about, and how'd you end up in Florida, and when did that happen?
Awesome. Oh, Florida is a healing place for me. I came back from the Middle East. I ended up actually putting my house in Cleveland up for sale and went to New Mexico to work on the Navajo and Zuni reservations. There's hospitals out there, obviously, but it's very unique. People have no idea, I think, what happens in this country. And it was a level of poverty that I had. It was an intense level of poverty out that way. Well, it just so happened while I was out there, COVID hit, and the Navajo Nation, Zuni, those places were the first to get hit, and they got hit very intensely. There was an enormous amount of death out there, and people were still figuring out this COVID. You're working at these little small hospitals and very little resources and stuff, and I'll say it got a little intense out there. That was a very interesting situation, actually. The National Guard came in and shut everything down. Like, you couldn't get in or out on the highways or anything. So during that time, I have family who lives in Florida. My daughter lives in St. Petersburg. My brother lives in St. Petersburg. He's been there for 10 years. So I've been going there for a long time. St. Petersburg has been home in its own kind of way. So this was about 2 years into it in 2020. Yeah, 2020. 21. It's hard to remember what year it is anymore, right? I came to visit my daughter. It was her birthday, and my son's up in Ohio. He actually lives on the farm and is doing his little farm thing up there, figuring all of that out. And while I was home, my daughter was very clear. She goes, I just have to tell you, you've gotten really you're in a dark place. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she goes, you're really getting in a dark place with what's going on over in New Mexico and this COVID stuff. And she said, James and I have been talking and we're just really worried about you. You need to move to Florida. And I'm like, no, I don't need to move to Florida. And again, it's the same story that I always tell myself. There's a lot of work there to be done. I'm doing a lot. I'm making a difference. I need to be there. So just to appease them, to be quite honest with you, I looked online. I says, well, you know what? If there's a job here or something that is in the realm of what I do for a living, I'll ponder this situation. So I went online. I looked for a job. There was one job in the whole area at that time, which is what I was doing in healthcare in the leadership position I was in. So I applied for this job. So on my way home, I flew from St. Petersburg to Cleveland to visit my son and the grandkids. By the time I hit the New Mexico airport in Albuquerque, I was having an interview and baggage claim. I'm not making this up. So I get this. So I'm interviewing for this job. I call my daughter. I say, hey, I look for a job. There is a job I'm interviewing. We'll see what'll happen with it. She goes, you'll get it. You always get it. That's not a problem. You'll be down here in a month. And I'm like, yeah, well, we'll see about that. And again, you can't make this stuff up. So I'm interviewing for the job. I decide to look at housing to see what housing would look like. They actually live on Treasure Island, which is in the outer part of St. Petersburg there. So I said, hey, I found this condo and it's in the same building you and Mark are in, but the rent in it seems really pretty inexpensive to everything else. And she goes, oh, that has to be wrong. So she goes, I'll take a look at it. She goes in, she's talking to the lady and she goes, oh, your mother, she was that lady who was just here. I've met your mother before. And she's like, yeah. She goes, well, I've had 25 people call on this apartment. And I'm like, yeah, I bet she did. And she goes, well, she told me she's going to hold it for you for 2 weeks to see if you get your job, how your interviews go. And I told her, don't worry about it. She always gets the job. And I'm like, who holds an apartment for 2 weeks for someone who's interviewing that you don't know?
Wow.
So needless to say,
Wow.
I got the job, and within 6 weeks, I was on Treasure Island, Florida, living, and was totally unplanned, totally unexpected. It took me over a week to resign my other position. Every day I was getting texts, did you resign yet? I'm like, no. Did you resign yet? I'm like, no. But I did. They came, they packed me up, and they drove me to Florida. Mm-hmm. And I've been there. It is a great place. And once I got out of there, I guess I realized I was in a dark place. But you don't realize it when you're in the middle of it. It was just really a lot. And that's when I was like, I have to be done with trying to save everyone else. And doing all of this, I think, is admirable in its own way, but you lose who you are. Like, I totally lost who I was and what I did. Mm-hmm. And now I'm refining myself. And I really want to provide the opportunity for that for other people. Now, it doesn't have to be on the level I am, where I'm just quitting everything and walking away. But there's definitely different levels of being able to reconnect and find yourself and honestly just stop the madness for a while. You got to believe St. Petersburg is divinely blessed. It really is.
I was not expecting that backstory. I love it for so many reasons, but you had someone that loves you and worries about you and cares about you. And what I always try to impress upon people is that she spoke something into existence. Basically, she planted the seed for you to move to Florida. And had she not said those words, we probably wouldn't be speaking here. You would not be in Florida. And you just said it. You love St. Petersburg. So, everything worked out with your condo and it's just, the stars aligned. And that's one of many things I love about that story. And I love the fact that, self-awareness is a virtue. And for you to recognize, when you're in it, like you said, when you're in it, sometimes you can't, see the big picture, but you're self-aware enough to know that you are going through it. Now you can get out of it and focus on what really, really makes you happy.
So I'll tell you the other thing, that when you talk about ending up places that you're supposed to be without the intentions of being there, is St. Pete is a really, what I think is a very spiritual area. I got to know there's a place there called Sacred Lands where they do these free weekly meditations. And I met so many people who were into crystals and meditations, and they were very curious. And every Sunday night we have drumming, on the beach. And I was like, wow, this is it's everything that I needed to really get myself immersed and do this transition. There is a big community out there, very, very like-minded people.
So let's talk specifically about what you're up to now, because that's the main reason why we're here. Share with our listeners the extremely valuable project that you're working on. Well, two main projects that are obviously interlinked. Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious and Wild Soul Gatherings. Tell me how you came up with these names. They're both such great names.
Oh, sure. So I started with the Wild Soul Gatherings, and honestly, I had so many different iterations of that. I think it popped up over a 2-year period where it was just the wild soul, people's wild spirit, and its gathering, bringing people together. The whole premise of this mission, I'll call it, is to bring people together and to commune, to support, to teach, to educate, or just to be, to provide that environment. We all have a soul, or I believe that it's my belief that everyone has a soul. And I feel like there's too many souls that are put in a box, and we need to release them out of the box and just get to our true nature of who we are. So when I first came out of the box, it started with the Wild Soul Gathering. It's not really the mission of what the purpose of what I feel the purpose of the podcast is. So for me, there are a lot of people out there who are very curious. There's a lot of people awakening in a way that there's more awakening awareness that there's more out there. You know, it's stepping beyond religion. I think religion is fine, depending what you're doing. To me, it's a sort of a step beyond. So it goes back to my Reiki days. Like, it took me forever to find these Reiki classes. There's other classes that I wanted to take, and I really had to search for them. So I think there's two pieces to it. It allows people the information of what's available and what it is. And I think a big part of it scares some people. There could be a demographic who thinks you're doing, the work of the devil, or, I think because of historically, we think of the Salem witchcraft trials or whatever it is, that there's a very uncomfortableness with it a lot of times, especially with people who are used to very traditional religion. I will say within my own family, part of the family is they're always very supportive. I will have to say that. They support me in whatever I do. But I do have a brother or two who turns up an eye and, are worried that perhaps I might go to hell over this. And I'm like, I assure you, that is not what's going to happen. I can't prove it to you on this side, but you'll figure it out on the other side. I know I'm not the only person who's going through those kinds of things. I think that it's pretty common. So it's really just bringing out information, right? Information undoes fear when people know what it is. I think information is just so important in so many different areas. So it's just exposing people to other people's journeys, their paths, that you're not the only one who goes through these things. If you want it, here's a lot of different ways to get there, because there's never one way to get to an ending place. And from my perspective, and this might speak to you, this may not speak to you. So it's just really exposing people to things to see if it's something that they want to try, or if they thought, oh, I always thought this is one thing. I had no idea that this really was what it is. So that's the intention of the podcast, is really to just expose the public to what's available to them if they want to start dipping their toe and experiencing other things.
Were you raised in a household that followed a specific organized religion? And if so, how fervent was it?
I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 9 years before I went to high school in a public school. So fervent, that's an interesting question. We didn't do a lot of, prayer kinds of things in the house. It was the school, it was catechism. My parents grew up in the same kind of thing. So it was sort of like, this is what we do. We're Catholics. We go to this church. This is our community. These are the rules. This is how you live your life. And these are sort of the expectations. And I myself found it was a little difficult when I started stepping away with some of the teachings that we were taught, which are man-made, and what I was doing. And it took me a hot minute to sort of, make peace with it all and get over it.
Did you experience backlash for that from,
No,
from anyone?
No, my family's very supportive. Some of them worry about me at times. They all worry about me on some different level, but no, not at all.
Well,
they're very,
I complained to my mom
very
about,
supportive.
Well, I complained to my mom constantly about how much she worries about me, and I'm in my mid 40s, but that's, at the end of the day, that's love right there. And so you can't complain too much about that. But I think it's a beautiful thing that they kind of let you evolve based on your own journey. Now, do you see it as a more of a spiritual evolution, or do you see it as more of a rejection of organized religion, or do you see it kind of as both in your experience?
So for me, I see it as a spiritual evolution. I would say that I outgrew it. I feel like for me personally, I feel like I outgrew a religion to expand myself beyond. I think that it's a great starting place for some people, but I think that there's a whole lot more to it.
Right. Okay. I think when you mentioned before that a lot of people have fear when people talk about spirituality, etc., I think that is so true because they kind of embed their own personal biases or assumptions into what spirituality means. I think part of that, and this is just a theory, that's why I'm so curious to see your perspective. I think part of that is because when you talk about spirituality, it feels to me that that's more like an individual thing. In other words, it's kind of like whatever you make it. Whereas, organized religions have various rules that you're supposed to follow, various beliefs. It's kind of, more defined in a certain way. Whether people follow those rules or not is up to them. But with spirituality, I see it as more of an individualistic thing. And it is somewhat more amorphous and more personal. I think in that kind of ambiguity to a certain extent, people see that, people are fearful of that. You can agree or disagree. I just would love to hear your thoughts on my theory.
Well, I think that you're spot on. If you were going to ask me the same question, I would just go ditto. I 100% agree with what you just said. It's your ability to think for yourself, create for yourself, be with yourself, where with religion, you have other people telling you. So you get to be more of an active participant in the spirituality, where in religion, you're more a passive participant. You're doing as you're told. Maybe that sounded a little brutal.
Well.
I didn't.
No.
I say with love.
I think that's spot on, and I don't see it as brutal. I see it as blunt. So blunt and true. So yeah.
So that's it. So we need to create an environment for that, right? So if you want to be an active participant, and we have people who are active, there's a lot of interaction that goes with it. So where's the venues for these things?
That's exactly right. That's why I wanted to use that as the perfect segue to talk about this farm. I'm fascinated by this idea because everything is done virtually these days, and you're clearly trying to spread your message and bring people together online, which is fantastic. But you're really walking the walk. You're getting people together. You bought this farm. Let me not steal your thunder. Tell us about this farm, and you can plug it as much as you want. Tell us, how did this come about and what's expected in the future? I want to hear about the retreats. I want to hear about what's going to happen. I want to hear about, if I'm a person that's going to be drawn to coming to the farm, who am I? Who is this for? So please just run with it.
Awesome. So this farm is in southern Ohio. It is about 224 acres. My son lives on the farm, and he is doing some farming. We have some goats, and we have lots of chickens. So he's going to be the caretaker, sort of farmer part of it. So building these retreats, in the process of taking the home that's on the property and setting it up as a bed and breakfast with a venue to have classes, do practices, that kind of thing. The property is beautiful. It has a little pond. So there's two aspects. I will hold, my own personal retreats here, but also make it a venue available for other people who want to hold retreats. So we're talking about small retreats, 5 to 7 people, very intimate. And there's a lot of other folks out there who are putting together organizations or businesses, or they do their own work, where they're always looking for a venue to get a group together for a weekend or a week to do things. So it will be set up for the availability of both. So we talked about the Reiki, and there's many different levels of Reiki. You could do a Reiki weekend with classes. You could do a Reiki week where you immerse yourself. The frustration sometimes with Reiki and when I teach classes is you're slamming a lot of information and practice into one day or maybe an evening and a day, and people walk away and you're teaching them and gifting them these tools that they have now, and they don't really have a place to practice it. So how great would it be able to immerse yourself into a week's practice of that? The property's big enough where you could put, it's sort of groups get together or individuals where they want to just do like personal sabbaticals where you spend 6 hours a day with yourself out in nature and getting together and journaling. So retreats built around those types of concepts with that. It's connecting with nature, disconnecting definitely from the electronics. So I think that's, back in the day, it was always, go to the mountain, meditate for 21 days. In the city, you can still become very, grow your spirituality in that urban situation. But there is something to be said to be out in nature, connecting, certainly with the fresh air of it. With anyone who would come out, we would do evening ceremonies, fire ceremonies every evenings. We would do sunrise meditation, sunset meditations. All of those things would be part of any event that came in that we would provide for people because this is the perfect experience for it.
Now, if my memory serves me correctly, in listening to your podcast, I learned about how you ended up choosing this farm. And you put in a lot of work and you looked at a lot of different places. It's my recollection that this farm didn't even meet your criteria. You kind of just asked the universe, is this the place? And is that true? And I just find that fascinating. It's just kind of like how things just fall into place like that.
100% true. When you asked, it was like this place, like I think checked maybe 2 of 10 to 20 check boxes on it. So it's interesting doing the retool of it. The whole farm thing came up as I was leaving the Middle East, was actively looking for the farm once I hit New Mexico. In fact, I would do we both would do a lot of online work and stuff. We did put a bid on a place when I was in New Mexico that didn't work out. So I would look at them. My son would go sort of do the legwork. I would fly up and take a look at some of them. And of course, it was during this crazy real estate time. A couple of times I would call on farms to see if I could make an appointment to look at it. And I would get, well, we have 6 bids. If you would like to put in a blind bid, the owner is going to choose tonight at 6:00. And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in that. Thank you very much. So it was really interesting. And when I found this place online, I kept going back to it. I kept pulling it up on the site for like 2 weeks, and it had just gone on the market. So I reached out to my son and I said, hey, would you take a look at this and see what you think? And he goes, oh my God, I love it. He goes, this is perfect for what I want to do, but I'm not really sure that I don't see where it meets your needs and what you want to do. And I thought, oh, he really is invested in what I'm doing. I says, well, let's set up an appointment, take a look at it. I flew up to Ohio and we came out. And at this point I had looked at so many different places, and he looked at some and he would fall in love with them. And, it'd be like, no, that's not going to work. And, so you have to navigate that whole business partner thing versus parent-child thing, which has just been, a whole journey in itself of growth for both of us, for sure. But I will have to say that actually we're doing a pretty good job at it, better than I would have initially expected. we got here and I was like, oh my God, this is like God's country. I am like overwhelmed. But as we came up, I'm like, it is literally in the middle of nowhere. Are people going to be able to like find their way here? And we're walking through, and the group had walked through this. There's this, I call it, it's a big barn, but that'll be the term that I'll use. It's a huge building. And it's got an apartment in it also. And I stood back and I stood there and I just like was stopped in my steps and I became really overwhelmed with like emotion. And that's just not me. Trust me. I just became really overwhelmed with emotion. And I was like, it was hard to explain. And it was like, oh my God, this is it. I don't understand how this is going to work, but I know this is it. And we continued to look at it, and it just out of all the other places that we tried to buy that didn't work, this is the one that fell into place. And now that we have it, and I've been up here, now that I stopped working, I've been up here a little bit more because I had spent very little time on it just because it's, there's no time when you're working that many hours a week. It's the right place. It's going to work. It's going to happen. And the goal is that we're going to be open for retreats summer of 23. My son says that it's going to be spring, but I'm going to set a realistic timeline and go with summer. And if we hit spring, I'll be really grateful.
Well, that sounds great to me. Like I always say, under promise and over deliver. So if you open up in the summer, that's fantastic. And if it's before that, then that's just the way that the universe intended. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that all works out for you. It's all very exciting, particularly because you're capturing your joy. It's been a long time coming. You're building a community for people to do that, whether it's online or physically, or in person, I should say. And I just think that that's absolutely wonderful. You're doing all the things. You're doing all the things, Sandra. So I just have a question out of pure curiosity. Do you ever get angry? And if so, what makes you angry?
So when we talk about spiritual growth, if you're looking for a defining factor of how you know you're growing spiritually or not, I would tell you right now, it is that I rarely get angry. Historically, of course, I worked in very high-powered, intense environments, and I was a high-powered, intense person in those environments. I absolutely got angry. I tend to internalize my anger, to be honest with you. But for me, angry looks at me bitching at someone back in a break room or when I get home over a conversation. That's what anger looks like with me. I would say, well, people in my life and, my team that was very close with me, they could just tell by my nonverbal. So you know how you try to control it, but they would say, you seem upset and angry. And I'd be like, no, I'm not. And they'd give me the look and I'd say, okay, yeah, I am.
I hear some passive aggressive tendencies here, but I will, is, not the healthiest.
No, not at all. Not at all. But I will tell you that that's the old me. I remember when I came back from the Middle East, I was sitting on the front porch and my son came over and he goes, I just have to tell you that you're really different. And when he said that, like, I was terrified. I thought, oh my God, what does that mean? I'm really different. And he goes, oh no, trust me, it's a good thing. And I thought, oh, okay. So I think a lot of times, just like other things, other people notice it before you're going to notice it. So what, that would have been 5 years ago or more, and as you evolve, but I know now, in fact, I catch myself and I'm like, wow, I feel really good and I'm at peace. Like, I don't understand. I'm not angry. I literally have that conversation with myself because I'm so amazed at how great it feels and how my responses are different because I input the information and dissipate it differently. Like, it's not personal. The perfect explanation comes after the fact. You have to let the process play out and trust in it.
I love it. I love it. So you said you had trouble finding out about Reiki and, you Googled it and it's hard to get a lot of information about it. If it's so hard to find out about, how did you find out about it?
So how I found out about it was I woke up one morning with, you need to become a Reiki master. And I was like, am I like hearing voices, or did something happen? Or, and then
Come
I thought,
on.
no, I am not making it up. And then I thought, maybe you just had this intense dream about this. But I kept hearing it in my head, you need to become a Reiki master. And I'm like, what is this? Now, at one point in my career, I worked as a psych nurse, so I knew better than to have a conversation with anyone about that, because that was a very long time ago. That did not feel safe to me at the time. I understand what all that was now at this point, because I've allowed myself to talk to people and other people shared information. And when I heard it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes so much sense, because at the time I really thought I was crazy. Again, I was very, very compelled with it. I would try to let it go, and it came up over and over and over again. So,
but you must have heard the phrase. You must have heard about it before at some point. I mean,
I honestly don't recall hearing about it, because I have a brother who's very deep into spiritual work, and was on this journey way further ahead than me. And I asked him about it. And he says, oh, yeah, I've heard of that before. It's whatever. He said something or another. And I said, well, are there any classes with it? And he goes, oh, I don't know. I'll ask around about it. And so I would ask different people in my life about it. No one really knew. I literally got an email at work that said, we're going to have these Reiki classes on the oncology floor. If there's anyone in the hospital that's interested in taking one, respond to the email. And I was like, oh my God, yes. And I responded to the email.
Wow.
And I was basically told, well, you don't work on oncology. You're not really who we were looking for. But if we have any spots left in the class, certainly you can take it. So they had 6 spots, and I think they had 4 people who signed up. And that is how I got into the Reiki class. Well, once I got in this Reiki class, I started, asking a bazillion questions of the people who were teaching it, and sort of gotten that network to link up with other teachers. And that's how that journey began. I am not making that up.
Well, I'm certainly not regretting asking that question, because that's not the answer I expected. I thought you were going to say, oh, you read a magazine, an article in a magazine, newspaper, you saw something online. Nope. All the nopes that ever nope. That's not the answer I got. So that's phenomenal. So
I don't even know that Google existed at this point in time, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow. That long ago. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's somewhat mind-blowing. Isn't it mind-blowing to you?
It is. It is. You know what's even more mind-blowing was I didn't talk about this for decades, and now I can feel free to share this story and feel good about it and feel like it's actually even got value to share the story. So those are the things that were buried deep inside, because they just weren't comfortable to talk about back in those days. For me anyways, but I think for a lot of people. And I feel like there's people who are where I was at back then now that are ready for the information.
Wow. Everything you just said has inspired me in ways that are completely unrelated to this conversation. But what you said resonates with me in more ways you can ever understand, because I'm just going to say it out loud for, I think, maybe the second time on this podcast. I read about and studied lucid dreaming when I was in college. So we're talking over 20 years ago. And I always kept it to myself. And it's such a powerful, wonderful, integral part of who I feel like I am as a person. But I never told anybody, because I thought people would think I'm crazy. And it's only recently that I've, expressed that to a handful of people. And now I'm going, one of my goals in the near future is to, just express it, especially now that you have all these online forums and you can, find more communities to talk about these things. So what you just said right there really inspired me to do the same thing with my lucid dreaming quest. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I love this story.
I want to help you spread your message as far and wide as possible. So first of all, do you have any events, or I know that the retreats aren't starting right away, but do you have any events or anything else coming up that you want to promote while you're here with me on the mic?
I do not. I just finished an event in Indiana where I did a talk, but I have nothing on the calendar at this moment.
Where can people find you on social media? I mean, obviously, we're going to have the links in the show notes, but, just tell us everywhere we can find you.
So right now it's Facebook, Wild Soul Gatherings, and I have the website wildsoulsgathering.com. And actually, I am in the process of upgrading my Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter as we speak.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts and your story and where you're going to go from here, and you're going to bring others with you. And I'm very excited to follow your journey. And hopefully this is not the last time we interact, because there's so much positivity in you. I'm a huge Dr. Sandra fan now. As soon as I started listening to your podcast, I became a fan. But now I'm even more so. So I just feel very blessed to have gotten an hour of your time to talk to you.
This has been awesome, Gerard, and I really appreciate it. And there will be a next time. But in the meantime, I will tell you, embrace your wild soul too.
Thank you. I'm trying. I try to do that every day. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Okay, I appreciate you too. Thank you, guys.
So I think for my fresh take, you're probably thinking he's obviously going to talk about the main topic of this episode, or, what one would think was the main topic of this episode, which is either the difference between spirituality and religion, or a preference between spirituality or religion, or some kind of rejection of religion, or any of that stuff. That is not exactly what ended up happening. We ended up covering so much ground, and I think it would be way too simplistic to focus just on that. And I think that, quite humbly, I think that Dr. Sandra's words should speak for themselves on those topics. I want to focus on something much more specific, which is the tension between service and self-care. She created her podcast, and she's creating the farm, and she's doing all of this as kind of the next chapter of her 40 years of service as a nurse. She's transforming that service into a different mission. But at the same time, she also admitted that self-care had become less of a priority to her, and she had to refocus on that. Specifically, what stood out to me was when she said, when you're in a dark place, you don't even realize it. Or she had to be done with trying to save everyone else. I fully believe in this. It kind of reminds me of what the flight attendant tells you when you get on a plane, that if the oxygen mask comes down, you got to give it to yourself first so that you can help the next person. You have to take care of yourself first. And I'll always remember that there was a line from the movie, I think it was Look Who's Talking, where, obviously this is years ago. When did that movie come out? I think it was like in the early 90s, maybe. I don't know, maybe whatever. But it was a long time ago. So, but one line that stood out is, that her baby daddy said that the reason that he was, basically being an absent father was because he was in selfish mode. And I thought that was a hilarious phrase. Now, obviously, he was being a jerk, and that is not a positive thing to say to somebody. He definitely should not be proud of that statement. But I thought that phrase was very interesting, and I co-opted that phrase since then to talk about self-care. Selfish mode to me is that I can recognize I know myself well enough, and I'm introspective enough to know that in order for me to be the best son, uncle, brother, friend, partner, anything under the sun, in order to be the best I can be, I have to take care of myself first. So when I say I'm in selfish mode, I mean it. I have to do me sometimes, and nobody should be ashamed of that. And there is a tension between being selfish, which usually has a negative connotation, but in my mind, it's your motivation, right? You're trying to be selfish and take care of yourself so you can do more service. And in my experience, the more service you do, the more fulfilling it is for you, and it makes you feel fantastic. It's so fulfilling, which is also kind of a selfish reason why you help other people, because it feels good to you. So I just wanted to let that marinate. And that is what I really drew from that, as far as that tension between service and self-care. And also, don't just gloss over what she said about being pulled to do something. Like she was pulled to go to the Middle East, or pulled into starting her podcast and things like that. I think her saying that she was pulled to do certain things is kind of a more, it's like a more elegant and thoughtful way to say, go with your gut. Okay. You just make sure that when you're pulled to do something, before you act on it, make sure that you're being pulled internally by either your soul or your spirit, and not externally by the opinions of others. And I always say, go with your gut, but I'm starting to really like this being pulled thing. I'm going to co-opt that too. So anyway, many props and many thanks to Dr. Sandra for putting so many ideas in my head and letting me think about and causing me to think so deeply about connections of different things in our lives that make us happy, that make us more productive, that make us better people, and better connected with others and ourselves. So I will be forever grateful. So thank you for listening in. And that is my fresh take. Listen in to the next episode of the Fresh Mix podcast. For details and show notes about today's show and our guests, go to freshmixpodcast.com. I'd really love your feedback, both on today's guest and on my fresh take. The Florida Podcast Network has a closed Facebook group exclusively for superfans of their shows. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments, get early scoops, contests, and other special treats. Or you can just complain about how Florida... Well, you know what? Let me pause for a second. This is where I usually complain about something about Florida, but at this time of year, I'm actually going to say something nice about Florida. And that is the fact that we're entering into the Halloween season, which is taken very seriously in Miami Beach, as I'm sure everywhere else. But the great thing about Halloween in Florida, particularly in Miami, is that it totally opens up your costume choices, because the weather is so good. So you can wear as much or as little as you want. Actually, that's a lie, because you can't wear as much as you want without getting super warm. So I know for a fact that my costume is going to cause me to get a little warm, but I have to take that into account. But at the same time, I'm going to get to see a lot of costumes that are, let's just say, use less fabric than people in other states are going to get to wear. And I'll just leave it at that, including the costume that my girlfriend just previewed for me by sending me a picture yesterday. And both thumbs up. All right. So be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Keep catching who's fresh in the Florida Mix with Florida's Fresh Mix podcast.